Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. This is episode number 118. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 9 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. And that includes Forever Fantasy Online, Defenders of the Realm, which is the Greystone Chronicles book number 4. After that will be Ariair Online, A Piece of Legend. After that will be Goblin King. Then it'll be Martyrs, and then after that it'll be Glitch Hunter. Then it will be Goddess Watch. After that, it will be Dungeon Boss Player, the beginning, and then last but not least, The Dead Rogue. So that's 9 new LitRPG reviews, full-on novels. I had to make up a little bit for the shorter show last week, make sure I caught up on everything. Of course, I know there are a bunch of new stuff coming out as well, but before we get to any of that, we're of course going to move into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're just going to do a quick roundup of the Adventures in Terror Book 3 news. Thank you everybody for the great support that you've had for me and for the works of Ramon Mejia for Adventures in Terror Book 3. It's done amazingly well. It was very scary, I'll be honest, to jump out of the Kindle Unlimited program. I'll note that, of course, the novel hasn't done as well as like the previous novels. Usually anything that I've written so far has come into like the top, 100 and like 150-ish on Amazon's paid Kindle store. This one not as well, but that is to be expected considering that a lot of people just aren't getting a chance to read it because it's not on Kindle Unlimited, and it's a pretty decently priced novel, which is reasonable for the page count, but still doing much better than I was so worried, to be honest, that this was going to just like tank, like nobody was going to read it or something. So it's been an interesting journey so far, but I do want to thank everybody for being as supportive as they have been, and making sure that they purchase the book of a series that I hope that they love. Just also remember to, of course, go leave reviews. That's also really important to help get the book on Amazon, algorithms, whatever happens there. Just helps keep new eyeballs on the novel when it does come out. So please go leave a review if you enjoyed it. So, also, before I forget, I'll also be at the Claremont Packing House in Claremont, California, this Sunday, June the 3rd, 2018. I'll be signing books, selling the first edition draft, print editions of Adventures in Terror Book 3, and of course, books 1 and 2 of the mentioned here series, as well as Project Office. So, if you happen to live in the area or in the area, go hang out there. We'll happy to talk to you, sign your books, anything like there. So, that'll be again, Claremont Packing House in Claremont, California, Sunday, June 3rd. There you go. Now in other LitRPG news, we have Alaron Kong, author of the Chaos Seed series, is giving away bumper stickers. If you email him at richter@litrpg.com, it'll be bumper sticker that says Gnomes Rule. So it's going to be free for you. However, Alaron has said that if you buy it for $5, all proceeds are going to go to Books for Africa, a charity with a 100 out of 100% score on charitynavigator.org. And according to the Facebook post, Alaron has said that LitRPG supporters have already raised over $400 last month this way for this particular charity. So if you want a free one, we're going to purchase it and give to the charity. They'll have a link in the show notes. It's at the litrpg.com website, which is Alaron's site. So you can go over there and check it out and donate or request a free one. There you go. Now, speaking of charities, as an update to a previous story, the Authors for St. Jude charity auction finished up this past weekend, and it raised $2,509, and that's an amazing amount. So I just want to thank everybody who took the time to either donate a novel. There are a bunch of LitRPG authors who donated signed copies of their novels to the auction winners, and also fantasy and science fiction authors. There's a whole list of them. We'll have a link in the show notes if you want to look whoever it was. And just a bunch of cool folks who donated to this particular charity, which is for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is an amazing charity to donate to. And also congratulations to anybody who won an auction. Some people won like 15, 20 books. as a LitRPG sign package or some other science fiction packages, or from other authors who you just doing bundles for the auction. So congratulations to anybody who won as well. But again, thank you everybody who donated. It's a good cause. You raise a lot of money to help people and children. Okay, these are some books that are out now. I haven't read them, but they are out as Liberty novels. Endless Online, Oblivion's Price. The third book in that series is out. Awaken Online, Book 3, Evolution by Travis Bagwell. This novel is kicking butts on Amazon's ranking score things that they do for like paid stuff. I believe it's been in the top 100 for a solid week at this point, I think, just about. And so congratulations to Travis Bagwell for writing such an amazing story and for having such good success. I'm always happy for my friends. I'm a little jealous, I'll admit, but I'm also a lot more happy for Travis Bagwell, who's a nice guy. I think of him as a friend, but he's cool. So congratulations, Travis, for having such a good success, man. Also out now is Trial by Fire, LitRPG Dragon Rider Adventure. The second book in that series, Cherry Blossom Girls 3, is out as well. World Jumper, a LitRPG Adventure. The Digi Dream Chronicles book number 1 is out. This was a weird story when that it was published originally, then taken down. Apparently this is the second edition of a book that was only in pre-order, I think, but it is out. So there you go. Also out currently is Free to Play, Restart on Hell Mode, Strongest, free to F2 Peer, free to play, or maybe a LitRPG web novel Volume 1. Volume 2 is also out. Volume 3 should be out in a few days. So I think somebody took all their works, dropped it on Amazon. We'll see how that turns out. And Cocky LitRPG by Robert Bevan, which is another short story that he's written. I believe it stars Cooper trying to have a good time with somebody. We'll see how that goes. But it is out as a LitRPG short story. Okay, in new audiobooks, we have Dungeon Opposed by William D. Rand, out as an audiobook. Soulstone Oblivion World of Rule, also out as an audiobook. That's book number 3 in that series. But Death is Not Forbidden, the 20-sided Eye series, book number 2, out as well as an audiobook. Desire Liberty Adventure, Volume 1 is out as an audiobook. I'll be honest, this one, I didn't know from the cover, because the cover art changed on the story, so I really didn't remember. I had to go look it up. But it is an actual LitRPG story, even though the cover art doesn't have a ton to do with the story. But it's a LitRPG story. We have a review inside if you want to go check it out. Also, as an audiobook is Gunmeister Online by Noah Barnett. So plenty of good audiobooks that came out this week. 5 new audiobooks for you guys to enjoy. And of course, we'll have links in the show notes for all the reviews that we had of any of those. Upcoming LitRPG, this is just where I read off the stuff that I know about that's coming out in the near future. This list is getting shorter and shorter. Fewer people are doing pre-orders, but these are still stories that novels that I know that are coming out. If you're an author and you want to get on this list, if you want to let me know when you happen to plan to publish your novel, your LitRPG novel, I should say specifically, feel free to contact me at feedback@geekmindspodcast.com. That's just that email address I have for all the stuff. Or LitRPGpodcast@gmail.com. Either way, they're the same. Get to me. Okay, on June the 5th, The Right to Choose Pharaoh book number 10 is coming out. June the 14th is going to be Killstreak book number 1, Respawn. June the 22nd, the second book in the Project Chrysalis series, End of an Era, will be out on June 26th again. On July the 10th, it'll be Restart, Level Up book number 1. That's that one that has to do with like boxing, I believe. So, curious. On July the 23rd, External Threat, Reality Benders book number 2 is also going to be out. On August the 7th, Death March Euphoria Online book number 1. And that's it. That's all I know about. That's all we have for pre-orders. So again, if you have a novel coming out and you want it on the list so people know about it, and it's actually a LitRPG story, that's really important, feel free to contact me and we can get that set up, hopefully. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we have our first story. Well, actually, this is a quick update. Forever Fantasy Online by Rachel Aaron and Travis Bach. This is 498 pages, $4.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, this is a quick just notice. It's not actually a LitRPG. I'd seen it on advertised several places on Facebook and on the LitRPG groups on Reddit. And the author has never actually said it's LitRPG. Like in all her promotional material and all actually their promotional material, it's always just been, oh, this is a video games kind of story. And the author actually contacted me for a review. Said that she was a huge fan of Sword Art Online, Dot Hack Sign, Lock Horizon, The Gamer, and her husband wrote the story without realizing that there was a genre that was kind of already doing this thing called RPG. Full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of the novel for review. I purchased it. I pre-ordered it. It's on pre-order now as I'm recording this, but I have purchased it just because I want to support authors. But also, this author is an author of another series that I happen to enjoy as an audiobook. It's she's the author of the Nice Dragons Finish Last and that whole Heartstriker series. So if you read that, you already know the author is a good writer. But she asked for a review from the podcast because she thought, oh, maybe this is LitRPG or GameLit or something. She wasn't quite sure. And I'm just letting you know right off the bat, it is not quite LitRPG. It's pretty close though. It's about as close, I think, as you can get without actually ever having heard of LitRPG. Essentially, a bunch of MMO gamers get transported, I want to say, to the world that their MMO was based on, but like the NPCs were also apparently, I don't know, trapped by some mysterious force into being NPCs, but they were real people the whole time. There's this whole conflict thing. It's an entertaining story. All the quest carriers and being in the world awaken angry at being trapped in endless cycles of NPCs. Player powers, abilities, and gears all work differently in this new, essentially Portal fantasy world than they did as in their MMO world, and they had to figure out the differences. It's a good story that focuses on two different stories, a brother and sister who are both trying to survive this new world while trying to figure out how it works. And the reason that it's to me a really close cousin to LitRPG because there's a lot of good game mechanics stuff here, but it's told from almost a fantasy-ish perspective because again, it's the MMO world these people were playing in, and now it's suddenly all a fantasy world, and so all their powers, now all their abilities, are kind of carried over, but they're then not really. It's like all those MMO powers and concepts and things like levels have been translated into this fantasy world to some degree or another, but it's given this physical reality. So, for example, there's no more infinite ammo. The abilities that players use and components run out, so their powers don't work if they have a physical component. There's no user interface anymore. No health bars, no mana bars, no macros, no notifications, nothing like that. For example, there are no character sheets, no item descriptions, nothing. Almost feels like all these characters, especially considering that they're all high level, have kind of become like this Supermen in this new fantasy world with people who are already established. All the NPCs turn out to be real people, and they're remnants of that MMO thing happening. So it's like I said, it comes super close to being a LitRPG, and the thing that really stops it from being the fact that there's no RPG progression. There are some RPG-ish powers or things that are referenced in the story, but they're not actually shown to the reader. They're high-level fighters. Oh, I'm level 80. I remember my health being at really high, or having a strength over 100 or whatever. But the reader never sees that, and none of that ever changes. No matter how many armies of monsters they fight and beat, no one ever becomes more powerful. So they're essentially static. And that's kind of the thing, at least for me, that stopped it from being LitRPG as those two things that the community's kind of agreed upon. One, it's set in a game world with evident RPG game mechanics. And this one kind of hits that mark. But it's the second part where there's RPG progression for the main character or the main characters according to those rules. And again, that doesn't happen. There is no progression. Nobody becomes more powerful. Nobody levels up or increases even a single skill. And believe me, I looked. I actually enjoyed this story. It's an entertaining story, but there's no RPG progression. And when after I finished, I was it didn't make it. but that's just reality. Like I said, the author didn't write this as LitRPG. They didn't know it existed, and it is just a good story. That it's definitely GameLit. It is, but is not quite LitRPG, unfortunately, and that kind of sucks. So for me, it's not going to get a bad review or anything from me because again, they're not advertising as LitRPG. They're just kind of figuring out where they're fitting in, and I advise them. Go advertise as GameLit. You fit in that particular category because you don't need RPG progression or mechanics in that particular category. And as such, it would get like a good score of like 7 out of 10. But it's just as LitRPG, it isn't, unfortunately. So that is the case. So there you go. Out as actual LitRPG, Dave Wilmar's Defenders of the Realm, Greystone Chronicles book number 4 is out. It is super good. Yeah, it's really good, actually. It's 450 pages-ish. There's no actual Amazon page description here yet, but I'm guessing it's about that page count. It's pretty beefy. $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Again, full disclosure, I got an advanced copy for review. And I, of course, purchased it when it became available. I'll read you the author's description. The kingdom is expanding, more land, more resources, and surprising new allies. Phil will gain some interesting stats, a new set of skills, and a patron deity of his own. Elysia is prospering, but Alexander and Elysians are forced to defend their lands against an invading orc horde from the north, and the dark army of demons and undead that have escaped from the caverns where Alexander imprisoned them. At the same time, the Dark One is somehow still working with the Drow Wizards to subjugate more lands and expand their evil influence. Join the Greystone Guild and the Elysians as they battle armies to defend their lands and people. They fight for freedom and their very survival, facing a ruthless enemy bent on destroying the world, but is the cost too high for Alexander to endure? So there you go. This is a good balance of character building, group banter, action, and large but still detailed battle scenes, dungeon diving, and a smidge of town building. The novel didn't get too big this time, which was something that for me kind of made it hard to connect to sometimes when you have like 30 characters in a scene, and you have like this huge massive battle where you're like naming a bunch of people and like people are falling left and right, and sometimes it just gets a little too big for me in particular. That's what she said, I know. But this didn't happen this time. It was a very manageable size. Like there were never more than like the main core group of characters and maybe a couple add-ins. So it was very easy to like focus on people's interactions, and it made it a much more enjoyable novel to me just because it was easier for my brain to like remember who everybody is and give depth to their personalities and give each person like a good amount of like, I don't want to say screen time, but like read time. Conversation time, whatever it is, and it felt like very comfortable. It felt like you were hanging out with your friends because you're already familiar with these characters. There's additionally some good kingdom building moments in this novel, and I mean by kingdom building is not the necessarily like the expansion of the castle or anything like that, although there are those moments too, but story scenes where it feels like the main character is really becoming a leader of men, where he's not just a guy who's playing a game or a guy who fell into like the job of being a king. Instead, it feels like he's really leading the people, and the people who are in his, again, relatively new kingdom are actually becoming a cohesive unit and becoming Elysians and not just NPCs or people who just happen to have migrated into his kingdom for a better life or whatever. And there are definitely some touching moments in this story that several other reviewers have already noted. Like, it made them cry. So the author is definitely pulling on a heartstring as well. Overall, like I said, a good read. There are, again, a couple of scenes near the end which may or may not bother you, may make you cry, make you angry sometimes. It was a very interesting ending, I'll put it that way. And honestly, I stayed up all night to read this thing. I really only intended to read one more chapter, and then it was another chapter, and another chapter, and another chapter, and before I knew it, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, and I was finishing this novel in one sitting. So I really did enjoy it, had a good time with it. Gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. Good stuff. So there you go. That's Defenders of the Realm, Greystone Chronicles book number 4, with the score of 7.6 out of 10. And okay, on to our next one, which is going to be, I forgot to number them this time, so I'm hoping I remember the entire time. Ariair Online, A Piece of Legend, written by Craig Dunn. Okay, this one is about 250 pages. It's, according to the author, it's 61,000 words. It's $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Again, there's no official page count from Amazon, even as the recording of this happens, so I'm going to give you a page estimation. The author's description is pretty brief. Ariair Online is the latest in massively multiplayer online gaming, and was hyped to be the first fully immersive virtual reality game on the market. To Jasper, an old hand in online gaming, it was simple. He needed to buy it. But what started as a simple game purchase for Jasper and his friends to pass the time became an obsession. Jasper began his journey finding that Ariair Online has more secrets hidden away than he could have ever imagined. Okay, this is a slice of life novel that honestly has a kind of a slow start, but once it gets going, it's full of action, adventure, and RPG leveling. The first 3% of the novel actually reads like a fantasy novel instead. So if you're just downloading the sample of this, just be aware that that's not actually how this is. All that is supposed to be, this is a slight spoiler. All that is apparently it's just a trailer for the game. So just don't get mad if it feels like a fantasy story. It's actually a LitRPG story. Don't worry, that's the only reason I'm mentioning this. But even then, like those points in that opening trailer portion of this novel section, there are those story elements that carry through the story. So just be aware that it's not filler either. Story-wise, again, this is a slice of life story that tries to be more. The story introduces you to the main character, his school, a few other real-life characters, and then goes, and the main character then logs into the full immersion game. There is a real-life storyline here that had potential. I mean, personally, I think that it wasn't developed as well as it could have been potentially. But it has like long-term story potential. If this is going to be a 3-4 book arc story, of course, there are a lot of things in there that can be played up and built up. It just wasn't here, unfortunately. In game, the story definitely dominates. It's the main character goes on adventures, he gets some interesting powers, he clears some dungeons, he levels up. And again, after about the 25-ish% mark, when the main character actually goes into his first dungeon, the action really picks up and the pace increases quite a bit. And it's like most after that, it's like action, adventure. And it's a really good, entertaining, fast-paced read. There is like this larger plot line about orbs of power that I think, again, has good storytelling potential, but it's, again, not really developed in this novel. Like, you see it at the beginning, you see it towards the end a little bit, but that's kind of it. It's used more as like a hook potentially for like book 2 or the larger series, which again, and which is why most of the story is just like, oh, it feels like slice of life, because you're just kind of following the character as he goes in adventures, does some stuff, he levels up, and again, it's not unentertaining. It's just like, oh, that's what it is. Game mechanic wise, again, this is relatively detailed. You get full character sheets, item descriptions, spell descriptions, ability descriptions, an explanation of the magic system, some good varied build choices. You definitely get enough information to plan your own character. That's always like a good thumbs up marker for me when you have enough information to do that. There are going to be some people who are going to complain that there's kind of too much information in one shot. Like a good 6% chunk of the novel during character creation is just kind of devoted to like a lot of information, like character classes and races and stuff. So there you go. It is what it is. And while you don't get damage notifications after a certain point in this novel, Comet never ever feels one-wavy, which is a good thing to me. Even when the main character helps defeat like a higher level boss, he doesn't do it alone. He's like helping a different group, and so it never feels wand-wavy. It never feels like he's soloing it or like he's overpowered, which is a plus for me, because that level of progression matches what's being described on the page and what makes sense for as far as the game mechanics. So overall, I had a good time with the story. I see there's a lot of places where the story can go, whether it's the real-world storyline or the game storyline. The beginning is, again, a little slow, and there's a bit of an info dump in the character creation section. But again, once you get to that first dungeon, bam, it really takes off. So if you want to stick with it that long, it's up to you. But I enjoyed it. I don't regret purchasing it at all, of course. And I personally look forward to reading book 2 in this. For me, it gets a score of 7.4 to 10. That's Ariair Online, a piece of legend with a score of 7.4 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, next is going to be The Goblin King, written by R.R. Verdi. I'm probably saying that wrong, but R.R. Verdi. Monster Slayer Online, The Goblin King. Hunt or be hunted. It is 398 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited as well. Here's the author's description. To earn a second chance at life, Devron Baines must die and enter the virtual world of monsters and mayhem. Let's just hope one death is all it will take because he can't afford another. When Devron Bain reaches his 21st birthday, he's finally punished for a crime that was never his fault, being born. In a world of strict population control, his life's been decided for him, and it's about to end. But a stroke of luck gives him the opportunity to have his consciousness uploaded into a simulated reality game world with the promise of paradise. Except paradise always comes at a price. Monsters of legend and myth of old come to life in Lorien, needing to be slain or tamed for Devron to have a shot at enjoying freedom. It'd be easy enough if one of the fiends hadn't raised an army hell-bent on conquering everything. The Goblin King has his sights set on taking the lands of Lorien in his iron grasp. And Devron Baines' only chance to quickly learn what it means to be a slayer. To make sure his new lease on life isn't painfully short, he's going to have to embody the greatest rule of the monster slayer online: hunt or be hunted. So there you go. This is an enjoyable action-oriented novel with light RPG mechanics. This novel almost, to me, epitomizes like an action RPG game with the emphasis on the action. There's a big focus on combat, and it's very well written. The fights are frenetic, visceral, and there's a good amount of variety among the bad guys. On the game mechanic side, though, it's honestly pretty light. There are no combat health or stamina numbers. The most common mechanic you see are the notifications and skill uses, like him calling out basically the skill he's going to use, and then the description, or like notifications about like, oh, you've gained enough stuff to get a new skill. There's a mention of leveling, increasing health and stamina in the novel, but the main character only levels once. I almost feel like the leveling mechanic was abandoned somewhere in the story in favor of like an emphasis on like skill development instead, because that's the only reference I could find to leveling in the entire novel that one time near the very beginning, and then that was it. Despite like the main character beating a fair number of monsters. Instead, like the main progress mechanic are skill points. After beating a group of opponents or finishing a quest, the main character is awarded skill points as a reward. These skill points can be used to buy new abilities or upgrade existing ones. There's supposed to be a variety of abilities available, but the reader only ever sees what the main character actually purchases, which to me is, again, not bad. It's a choice. It's just one of the things I think could be improved. Like, it's a real simple fix to essentially just add the options and like describe the main character's reasoning of like why he chooses one or the other, instead of it just being, oh, these are the ones I chose. It's a small detail, and it again doesn't ruin anything in any shape or form. It's just like, oh, that would have been like an easy way of like increasing like the game mechanic depth of the story, which would have been kind of nice. And that's kind of a thing here, is just there's not a lot of depth and detail to a lot of this, unfortunately. Like I said, there's a lot of informational stuff here where the main character chooses abilities and he upgrades them with skill points. But when actual combat hits, when like the rest of the story goes on, it feels fairly fantasy-ish. You eventually get a few like notifications or informational documents about like items and stuff, but again, lighter on the RPG side, which is fine. It's still LitRPG. There is RPG progression set in a very explicitly said game world, but again, the emphasis for the story is mostly on combat. Story wise, this is a slice of life story. Even though you get an introduction of the Goblin King in the very first pages, it's mostly like a vague motivation for the main character to improve, and it's something that comes back by the end of the story. Great, but you mostly follow the main character and his group as they go from fight to fight, increasing their skills and accomplishing some quests. Again, overall, a good read if you're in the mood for an action-heavy story. If you want something with lots of RPG mechanic detail, this probably isn't going to work for you. And that, I mean, it's fine. Like I said, an action RPG, heavy on the action, lighter on the RPG. For me, I had a good time with this still, though. Get the score of 7.2 out of 10. That's Goblin King, a LitRPG GameLit Adventure Monster Slayer Online Book 1, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. There we go. Okay. There we go. Number 5. Martyrs, LitRPG Book Number 1, Legends of the Great Savanna, written by J. Lincoln. That sounds like a commercial. J. Lincoln. Okay. Sorry. It is 305 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. After being approached by the military and with a contract he couldn't refuse, James winds up uploaded into a virtual reality game as a beta tester. Waking up in the Great Savanna, James struggles with a less than useful interface before he comes across two creatures locked in battle. The shoulder-high grass allows him to glimpse a lioness creature fending off the torrent of scales and claws. Sneaking up to steal a better look at the surreal situation, James discovers two things. 1. Getting hurt in the game, well, hurts. 2. This noble race of lion men named Martyrs have almost been decimated by the scaled lizard creatures. By unwillingly saving the life of a martyr cub, James is adopted into their village. He grows to love the beauty of the Great Savanna and his adopted brother, whose life he saved. That is, until Patrick arrives, and the tranquility of the game is shattered. James embarks on a mission for answers to his steadily increasing list of questions. On the top of that list, what the hell happened to the human race and well as my brother? There you go. There are a couple notes as LitRPG categories, town building, and MOBA. So I'll make sure to include those categories when I list it. Okay, this is again a slice of life story. Though it starts out with a trapped in the game premise, it feels more like it's transported to a game world, and that's mostly again because of the way that the NPCs are set up, in that they're not dumb NPCs who just give quests and have like static lines or anything. Instead, they're fully fleshed out characters with their own histories. The world has a larger world history, connections to the tribes, and incidents in the world. There's a lot of depth to these other characters, so I would make it again feel more like, oh, this is more like transported to a game world kind of fiction. The story follows the main character James, who's uploaded into a full immersion game in what he thinks is like a 6-month job for the military. His brother's supposed to upload it right after him. That's not like spoilery, that's in the novel description. But once he gets to the game world, he's really just like dropped there, and he has to, part of his job is to figure things out, figure out the game world works, kind of beta test it. And he's helped out by a tribe of linemen who eventually, look to James for help in return. Most of the story just basically follows James as he fights, he levels, he learns about the RPG mechanics, and he adventures with these other characters. And that's kind of what it is. It's an interesting story. I enjoy the depth of it. The game mechanics story start out pretty light, but more detail is gradually revealed as the story goes on. By the 20% mark, you get a full-on details about just about everything, including build theorizing, how stats work, how to increase skills. There's a bit of crafting and level advancement. Eventually, town building and mechanics are also introduced. There's also a MOBA-style gameplay towards the 75% mark or so, which is, it felt a little odd. I feel like the author just decided to like add a bunch of stuff sometimes, but there's a whole system there. With monsters running down lanes, the main character and his team having to beat them. It's a whole thing. And so if you like MOBAs, that may be a sponge to shoe for this particular series. Overall, again, a pretty decent read if you enjoy slice of life stories. I do. I had a good time reading it. But I did notice towards the end of the novel, a lot of the RPG parts seem to become less prominent, like the last 20%-ish. So I'm like, oh, that is what it is. For me, though, still a good read. Score 7.2 out of 10. There you go. This Martyrs, LitRPG Book number 1, Legends of the Great Savanna, with the score of 7.2 out of 10. Okay, on to the Glitch Hunter. This one's written by Skylar Grant. It is 604 pages. It's just massive. $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Do you love hunting monsters, dark worlds, swords, and sorcery? Alex is a glitch hunter. Member of a house of monster hunters, they possess mysterious bracers allowing them to see the world with the interface of a video game. Even with the edge that offers, most glitch hunters die young, thrown by quests into areas of deadly conflict. Alex's first quest draws him to a city with a grisly past, and unless he can discern truth from lies in time, an even darker future. So there we go. It's literally like 3 sentences. So there you go. Now I should forewarn you, there is one semi-graphic sex scene in the near the beginning of this novel, but that's the only sex scene. So, but that's the thing for some people. Like some people don't like it at all. So just a heads up, it's very skippable. Didn't ruin anything in the way she performed. Just letting you know. Okay, this is actually a good story. It got one of the higher scores this week because it does something different to me. It combines monster hunting with a detective story and RPG elements, and I think that's really neat and interesting. Skylar Grant has always been willing to try new things and write in different genres and pulling a bunch of stuff from a bunch of games. He has several series, and sometimes that gets really weird. But this time, though, this one feels very grounded. Like everything he does in this particular novel, I feel like I've seen in like actual video games, and I think they're pulled very well together in a story. Thematically, and like setting wise, it kind of feels me like The Witcher. Reminds me of The Witcher 3 in that it's a dark fantasy world where monsters and supernatural creatures roam the land. The only people capable of hunting them down are strangers summoned from other worlds that are imbued with RBD powers, capable of absorbing the unnatural essences of the monsters and using it to become stronger. In other ways, like the way the story is told, also reminds me of The Witcher 3 in that there are a lot of like there's one big arc in the story with like the big goal for the main character, but at the same time there are a lot of like little quests and little stories that are interesting in their own rights, and they kind of leave breadcrumbs like they all mix into like the larger story sometimes, and that's what storytelling kind of feature from Witcher 3 again is reminding me in this story. There's also though a detective story, and part of the cool thing from that particular perspective is that there are game mechanics and problem-solving tools and detective tools that are used that remind me from the Batman Arkham series. So if you've ever read Batman Arkham or Batman Arkham City, those tools that Batman uses, like analysis mode where he looks around and you get to see special clues and stuff, that actually shows up here. And I like the fact that there was something different here, but it's still very game mechanic wise, and it's something that can be upgraded. So there are different levels of information. And so the action and detective elements in this story work really well together. I thought that was which made it more unique and interesting, at least for me. Game mechanic wise, again, there's a lot of familiar stuff here. Experience points levels, upgradable powers, damage notifications, item and power descriptions. Again, however, there are some more original concepts the author brings in, including multiple kinds of experience points or essences that can be absorbed to increase specific kinds of abilities. For example, black experience points or black essence used to upgrade the analysis mode of the glitch hunter, or the abilities associated with killing. Green experience points or green essence can be used to upgrade speed and health. And there's like a good like 6 or 7 versions colored types of experience points and essences, and they all have different themes and different backstories and history and different factions associated with them. So there's a lot of like story element building here, and there's a lot more that can be developed later. Like there are like 3 major, or I should say about 2 major factions in this particular story that are related to those specific essence types. And it like I said, really well done, interesting stuff. Other game mechanics that, again, I haven't seen in LitRPG stories includes that analysis mode I talked about, which, again, reminds me of a mechanic from Batman Arkham Asylum. And, again, it kind of gives you an augmented reality overlay that highlights clues and gives special information about monsters. And, again, it doesn't start out super powerful, but it's upgraded as the story goes on and eventually becomes a key element in the mystery-solving part of the story. And, again, there are lots of other nods to other games, but, I'll leave those for you to discover because that's part of the enjoyable part of these stories. Overall, it's a good story set in a well-fleshed-out world. I had a really good time reading it, and I look forward to reading the next story in the series. For me, it gets a score of 7.8 out of 10. That's the Glitch Hunter with a score of 7.8 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to Goddess Watch by M. Colray. There you go. This is 273 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. He's lost everything in our world. He's not going to let the same thing happen here. Daniel's new life in Alterna was supposed to be easy and relaxing, but instead of the sleepy shopkeeping job he planned on, he's dumped into a swamp full of feral monsters, lost gods, and savage lizard people. He's up against ancient civilizations, power-hungry players, and a serious case of culture shock. And he's got nothing but his barrier magic to face these challenges. Worse, the company that runs the game might have motives that don't have Daniel's best interests at heart. How's he supposed to survive when the masters of this new reality are against him? So there you go. I'll be honest, the biggest striking thing about this novel that just doesn't fit is the cover art. The cover art on this does, in my opinion, a disservice to the novel. Not only does it not have to seem to have anything to do with it, like the main character is a dude. he hangs out with a bunch of lizard people. So the girl on the cover with the elf girl on the cover with the sword and the tattoos, honestly, I don't recall anybody in this entire novel looking like that. And the typography of like the letters and stuff, it makes it look like a fantasy or like a romance novel. And that's definitely not what this is. Like, this is an action story. It has a lot of interesting details. And like I said, just don't judge this novel by this cover in particular, because it's kind of a disservice. This is a good action-oriented novel. The story reminds me a bit of like Dances with Wolves in a lot of ways. If it were a LitRPG story, of course. The author really does like a really good job in the first like 10% of the novel of establishing like a really good amount of sympathy. Like there's some ham-fisted emotional manipulation, I'll be honest, but it does a good job of making you care about the main character and what he does. Like, the author's like genuinely like cruel to the main character. Like seriously, he's this is slightly spoiler, but it's not like intrinsic to the novel, I suppose. But like, he kills the main character's parents, he cuts off all his legs and his arms, and he throws him into like a bunch of like bad situations, like physical therapy and like a bad home. Long-term care, just like the main character has like a super good reason to like wanting to live full-time in this game world. Like I said, it's a really well done section. Again, it's designed to sympathy for the main character, and it did it. By the time he got dropped in that game world, I genuinely cared whether he was gonna die in the first few minutes, and I was like, oh, please don't kill him anymore. Like, he's had a rough enough time. So like I said, it's a well done first portion of the section. By the 10% mark, he's in the game. He's literally dropped in the game, and he has to figure out a way to survive in the swamp. And again, this is not spoilery. It's in the novel description that he meets these lizard people, and all he really wants to do is be a crafter. He doesn't want to fight the main character, and he chooses a skill set that's appropriate for that. But he's essentially forced to. And again, it's part of the game developers' ulterior motives that they have plans for the main character. So it's all part of that whole first 10% setup there. The main character is taken by these native lizard people, and he must learn their customs and earn a name for himself. And to be honest, I was really excited by this point in the novel. Like, I really thought it was going to be great. I thought it was going to be like an 8 out of 10 when I started this part. So like, the first 20% is probably my favorite part of the story, because again, it reminded me of like a Dance with Wolves, or like a stranger in a strange land kind of story, where the main character is dropped in this weird situation where he doesn't know how things work. He has to figure out his powers, but at the same time, he meets this tribal group of lizard people who don't seem to have like the same access to like all the RPG mechanics that he does, and so they live their lives whatever way they live them, and he has to learn from them to survive in this very inhospitable swamp situation. And to be part of the tribe, if he's going to live there, he has to earn his name, which is there's a lot of cultural depth that the author really does establish very quickly in this novel. And he makes this lizard tribe of people, the people who call themselves the people, which is very common, and it's a good way to establish like a cultural system. There's a lot of like cultural depth there, and so I thought when I was reading this, like, oh, this is going to be a good story. It's going to be different, and it didn't turn out to be that way. So I was slightly disappointed in the fact that it again, it's not a bad story. It's just that I thought it was going to go one way, and it decided to go somewhere else that was a little more well trodden. It pivots from that perspective of like him learning from these people and appreciating their culture. It just pivots a little bit to something a little more standard, a little more action adventure, dungeon diving, that kind of stuff. A little more, where he's showing those barbarian lizard people the real way to survive and to solve their problems. Then he's their hero, the more advanced civilization one. And so they're like these interesting sub things, which I don't think are intentional, but they still exist. It just kind of pivots. The game company has plans for the main character. They don't know I'm having a peaceful life. I'm not going to spoil like what happens, but the tone shifts again from the main character learning from to saving them and improving their lives with his advanced civilization tech and game powers. Again, not bad. It just didn't go where I thought it was going, which would have been really awesome. I think that, like I said, this had potential for like an amazing stranger in a strange kind of story. It just didn't go there, which is fine. The game mechanic side, there's nothing particularly special here. There's loads of detail about like customizable skills. You see standard stats, you see character sheets, skill progression bars. There's a skill progression system. So there's lots of like details, but none of it's really like particularly new. There is some crafting. And I did like the introduction of like a new crafting system like called bone crafting, which I thought was really neat, especially considering that it's intrinsic to the lizard people's tribal culture. So that was cool, but most of it's just like, oh, it feels relatively standard. Overall, it's a good read. Loads of action after the 30% mark. And again, even though the story didn't go where I thought it was going to go, it was still an entertaining read, just not as good as I thought it was going to be. Like, I thought the author was going to do something very different. And it didn't end up being that way, which is fine. It's nothing wrong with that. People who enjoy Liberty Stories will probably enjoy this as well. It gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's Goddess Watch, a LitRPG GameLit adventure novel with a score of 7.4 out of 10. Okay. Next up is Dungeon Boss Player, The Beginning by Paulo Estevel. It is 300 pages, there's no official Amazon page count. It's also $3.25, but it's not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. In the near future, gaming changed quickly, and now a real virtual reality was created, and games soon appear. And one of the newest was Dungeon King World, a game where the player is a dungeon boss and has the full control all over the dungeon domain of how to make it grow and how it will interact with the outside world. That is one sentence, ladies and gentlemen. It continues. Inside a dungeon, the boss is king or queen, and the monsters inside will follow their command without questioning it. And that novel description kind of tells you some things about the story right off the bat, that there are writing issues, and that does seem to be the case here. So just for warning, this novel is kind of a challenge to read. I'll give you an example, like an actual sentence from the story to kind of help you gauge what level of writing issues are here. Here's the sentence. You did a great choice. Don't kill child that come unarmed. Now that's probably one of the more challenging sentences, but those kind of issues pop up on a fairly regular basis. So if that bothers you in any way, shape, or form, skip this. It is going to bug you. My brain, even when I picked it up when I'm reading it, normally I kind of ignore like small writing and grammar errors because it's just kind of part of the genre. Because a lot of us are just amateur authors or, first-time authors or whatever the case is, or can't afford editors. But this was kind of an egregious example. So just heads up. Okay. The story is set up as a dungeon master novel, or a dungeon core novel. The main character, Daniel, plays a VR game that puts him in the role of a boss of his very own dungeon. He gets to decide how to build his dungeon, what monsters to spawn, and how to evolve them, and his own powers. So that's all how it's set up. Unfortunately, there's actually very little dungeon creation or dungeon diving in this novel. Like the reason I say this is because I don't want you to expect this to be like the Divine Dungeon series or the Slime Dungeon Chronicles, which are very much Dungeon Master Dungeon core novels, in that the focus is on creating the dungeon, creating pathways and traps and enticing adventurers in and killing them and absorbing their essences or XP and advancing your dungeon with new traps and upgrading your monsters and evolving them, all that stuff. That is a very small part of this story, which is weird because it is set up as a dungeon master novel. Like it literally says in the beginning of the novel, it's like, oh, the main character is going to play this dungeon story, where he's the dungeon boss, or he's the dungeon master. He's the dungeon master of the story. There are really only two places where this kind of comes into play. One is where the main character has his dungeon tested, where one group of adventurers comes in, and then one's where the main character is testing another dungeon that somebody else makes, and that's it. Those are also the only combat scenes in this novel. So it is a good sized novel, but those aspects of it are very minimalized. So I just don't want you to have high expectations of this when you're reading it. If you choose to read it, I want you to understand that there's a lot of other things here. It's just those particular aspects, which you think would have been like the big portion of it, just aren't. The story has like this anime charm. There's some very funny moments in it. A lot of it has to do with the main character. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but he as the monster boss, he can actually leave the dungeon, and him and his group of monsters go out and do stuff. There's like this storyline with the local village, and the author does introduce a very new aspect of like dungeon competitions between each other, or like dungeons be able to conquer other dungeons which are nearby, which I thought was kind of neat. But honestly, it's really hard to read. And sometimes that combined with, again, the Dungeon Master story expectations that just aren't fulfilled made it harder for me to enjoy the novel. It made it hard to connect. Like I said, good things, really good characters. I'll have to say that's a good point. The main character is interesting. His dungeon boss creation is interesting. A lot of the other secondary characters have good personalities. Like I said, they're fun and funny in a lot of different places. But again, the writing is probably going to be the biggest thing for people to overcome, because it is especially challenging in some places. Like nouns and verbs are missing sometimes from whole sentences, and its tenses are mixed up, and there's a bunch of other stuff there. So for me, even though I couldn't enjoy it as much as possible because of, again, those two aspects. For me, it could score 6 out of 10. But if you can ignore the writing issues, if you don't expect it to be super dungeon mastery or super dungeon core, I guess, you might have a better time with it. But for me, it didn't hit that mark for me. So again, not a boring story though, just not good either. So it's Dungeon Boss Player, the beginning, with the score 6 out of 10. There we go. Okay, this is the last one, I believe. Yeah. Nope. 9. There we go. That's the one. Again, I apologize. I forgot to number my pictures in my notes. Okay, we have The Dead Rogue, book number 1 of the NPC's Path, a LitRPG series written by Pavel Kornov. It is 275 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. This is another Russian translation done by, I believe it's Magic Jump Books. So that was written in Russian and it's translated in English. So expect that there are going to be a few cultural translations that happen, and like a few like little small things happening translation-wise that maybe don't always make sense, but for the most part, really well done translation, to me at least. Here's the author's description. Virtual worlds are places of boundless freedom. Anyone can become an elven mage or an invisible rogue, join a clan and go on raids, fight, develop their characters, and most importantly, escape from the daily grind. However, a game is only a game if you can quit. This is something I learned the hard way. I just wanted to let off some steam in virtual reality and ended up getting murdered and imprisoned in the body of one of the undead, slow, clumsy, and cursed to die at the hands of other players over and over again. The only way out of this awful predicament was to find the legendary Scroll of Rebirth, but the helpless, plaque-ridden corpse would need to be turned into a real killing machine. If only people knew what it was like to level up a dead rogue. So there you go. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel when it became available. This is a trapped in the game LitRPG story. The introduction to the main character and the way he gets into the game are brief, and he's really there by the 3% mark. So he really does get in the game trapped there fairly quickly. The setup is relatively simple. From there, it's actually a interesting exploration of what it's like to be an undead monster in the game. The main character can't talk to players due to low intelligence score. He can't go outside during the day, and it's constantly being killed by players, which is a very, again, interesting story to me. Again, it feels very different from your standard hack and slash adventure quest story. Unfortunately, that aspect of the story becomes dulled as the main character starts to progress and improve his character and finally starts talking to other players. From there on, it gets to be more of the standard slice of life MMO playing story. The main character's goal to get out of the game is always there, but he never really makes any progress towards it. There are still some interesting quest lines that the main character follows, but as he progresses again, he starts to feel more and more like a normal player, and the aspects of his undead nature that are problematic, they're still there, but they stop being... the story stops feeling like it's about him being a monster class, and instead it makes it feel like he's just another player faction trying to hide his nature necessarily. So it's, like I said, it's kind of a shift in what I thought it was going to be, or at least with the first portion of this. Like the very first portion of this, it really just felt like it's a monster story. Like the main character is trapped in the body of a monster, and he has to figure out how to not get murdered repeatedly by the players, and how to communicate and how he's trying to get out of the game, but how things are different from him as a monster character. And again, it just kind of shifts to like a more standard MMO story after he starts to level and progress. Things that are interesting about the story that I still think are unique is how the main character uses his undead traits, which expand or level like a new class to overcome the odds and accomplish his goals. There's a good amount of detail about skills, racial abilities, class abilities, game mechanics, item quests, all that good stuff. So it's definitely an RPG, and you definitely get like a ton of information about that kind of stuff. Overall, even though it feels like a more slice of life story, there's really no resolution of any big goals presented. And that's kind of the reason why it feels slice of life. Doesn't mean it's not interesting though. It's a very interesting story. The action is good. The game mechanic stuff is detailed, and it was interesting to see how the main character built his character. And there are several really good story arcs. Like there are several like quest lines that I thought were really well told and very interesting, and showed some good long-term potential. The antagonist for the story he's decent. He's not the best bad guy I've ever seen, but he does his job of like pushing the main character to progress. I particularly like the late storyline companion that adds a balancing weakness and vulnerability to the character. It was like a particular highlight to see like this character I thought was going to be a throwaway character from the beginning come back and become more interesting, I'll say. It has the potential of developing into a nice touching relationship, but again, most of the story is again action, adventuring, questing, from kind of the perspective of the player who happens to have a factional race of the undead. Entertaining, not as entertaining as I was hoping it was going to be. I really did from the beginning just think it was going to be, oh, this is like a monster story, like the Goblin King, or I forget what it's called, Life Reset, where the main character is the monster and he has to deal with the cultural aspects and the game mechanics of being a villain or being the enemy to players. And that's not what this ended up being. It starts off that way, but then it shifts. It pivots into like a different kind of story. So that it is what it is. Not an entertaining story. It's just, oh, I thought it was going to be more original, more interesting in that respect. Still a good read. Gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. That's The Dead Rogue, an NPC's Path book number 1, LitRPG series, with the score 7.1 out of 10. So there you go. And that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's everything. Thank you very much for listening, for watching me talk about the LitRPG stuff that I happen to love. If you want, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon, or on our webpage. And there's plenty of other places that you can follow us at, and other LitRPG groups. So please go enjoy. If you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Help keep this podcast free and ad-free. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with me, for, again, letting me talk about this thing I love. And until we can hang out again, until you can discuss this again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.